Welcome to Divorce Cafe, the podcast where we demystify, detangle, and hopefully detox the legal processes that follow a separation with the experts in the relationship property world. I'm Tina Henderson, and this is Shelley Fidel. Today, we have a very special guest. So hallowed are the circumstances in which you usually encounter him, a family court judge. When you go to court, you are acting on faith, putting your life in the hands of a person that you have never met before. Judges like Judge de Jong repay that faith in the judiciary. Judge de Jong epitomizes a considered, thorough, empathetic approach to resolving the sort of complex and highly charged disputes that come before the family courts. He has had a career-long interest in improving outcomes for victims of family violence. He worked for many years in his community, including pro bono work on top of a demanding caseload. I would imagine he has made a very recent move to Tauranga, and we will really miss seeing his name appear on the court docket here in Auckland. And he joins us via Zoom on his very first day on the job in the District Court at Tauranga Moana, Judge Lex de Jong. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Divorce Cafe.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, so we always like to start with a bit of a icebreaker, Judge de Jong. As we are not together in the same room, we're on Zoom, we'll pull one out of the bucket for you. Would you like to do the honors?
I saw the one at the top, which is what is the best breakup song ever, which doesn't seem quite dignified enough current circumstances.
Okay, if there was one thing you would go back and do differently at high school, what would it be?
I would do high school once.
Have you done it? I've done it twice. Have you done it twice as well?
Yes, I have. So I went to Morrinsville College at a time where not many kids were interested in school, including myself. And I ended up getting expelled from Morrinsville College, and I was sent to boarding school.
Wow, was not expecting that.
Wow. Okay, so a few different life choices in those couple of years.
That gives a lot of hope for parents with wayward children at college.
Yeah, it gives hope to all of us. Okay,
so the next section that we're covering is called What We Find Interesting. So similar, but what was your pathway to law and why do you stay in it?
Well, my pathway was quite different, having regard to the fact that I was expelled from school. I had no interest in school, and it was my mother who made me go to boarding school. And so I repeated the fifth form, and I nearly got expelled in my first week at boarding school as well, because I really didn't want to learn. And being a typical boy, I struggled with schoolwork. And it really wasn't until after university and I was practicing law that I started to have an interest in academic studies. So I was a very average student at university, also at school. But the beauty about boarding school was that I attended every class rather than wagging all the time. And I developed an interest in doing something to make a better life for myself. And when I was in the sixth form, one of my friends I talked to about what we were going to do for the future, and I thought about law. His father was a judge and a high court judge, and I had a chat with him, and I was determined then to become a lawyer, and that's how it started.
Wow.
So you just didn't find anything at high school that spoke to you that was interesting?
Well, certainly at Morrinsville College I didn't, but once I got to boarding school, I started to learn study habits, the first of which was actually going to class, and the second was taking in what they were saying. So that's how it happened. And I think that route has been helpful for what I do, particularly in dealing with boys. We tend to be slower on the uptake anyway. We tend to develop later in life. And certainly when I was doing criminal work, it resonated for me a lot with youth and what happens for them and how you can get into the wrong groups very easily.
I was recently told, and I didn't realize this, that overseas in some jurisdictions, when you come out of law school, you decide to either be a lawyer, an advocate, or to be a judge. So you don't have lawyers who then lobby to, become judges and who change that kind of focus. Do you think that idea has some merit?
Well, it might do. I don't know how effective that is. It seems strange to us because you have to be a lawyer first. But there may well be some merit, and I don't know if any research has been done into whether when you follow that course, whether you become a better judge or not. It'd be interesting to know, really. And I think the experience is different for everyone, just as my experience of doing law is different from others. In fact, when I was at university, I did a mooting competition because it was compulsory, and I decided I was never going to do court work. I was so terrified by the experience.
Oh, so have you since learned that wasn't representative of what it's like?
Yes, but what happened was I went overseas for a year after university and came back worried that I wasn't going to get a job. So I started door knocking in Hamilton, and I got to the firm that was going to employ me, and they said to me, we've got a litigation job doing court work. And I was so desperate for a job, I said, oh, that's just what I'm looking for.
Fake it till you make it. Worked quite well.
Yes, and the advantage I had was in the first year of being a lawyer, they introduced district court jury trials. So I was doing jury trials in my first year, going to Court of Appeal. In my first week, I was handed a file for a dangerous speed charge and just given the file and told to go to court. In those days, you didn't have any supervision as such. You were expected just to do the work.
Yeah.
So that first year was very scary, learning everything new and being scared of judges and being scared of everyone, basically.
People's lives in your hands.
Yeah.
Yes.
Must be a Hamilton thing, because I actually went back to school so that I could be a lawyer as well, and then decided it was something I never wanted to do, be a lawyer. But then you kind of come around once your frontal lobe develops, I think. Yeah,
and sometimes when you're pushed into a situation that you don't want to be in, you actually work a way of doing it. And for me, it's been really good. Being a lawyer has been the best part of my legal career.
Okay, when I look at your CV, I wonder why lawyers have such a bad reputation. But law does attract very driven people. It is a demanding job and can leave little time for pursuits outside of the office. How do you think law can continue to attract people with a broader experience and different skills?
Well, one of the ways that I think would be good to enhance is in schools. And I'm talking about lawyers going into schools, judges going into schools, to give students an option. And I know that Waikato University does school competitions for mooting, and that's been very successful in getting people to consider law as an option. Not always ending up going to Waikato Law School, but they offer as a prize, I think, a free year of tuition fees. So it's very attractive, but it encourages competition, and it also weeds out those who have got A-type personalities, which tend to be better suited to be lawyers, especially in litigation work. Yeah. I think that's probably the best place for developing interest, though, but also going to universities, because these days I notice that a lot of students change subjects or courses or degrees, and that may be an area where we should be targeting as well, lawyers and judges.
And because being a lawyer, I found when I came out of law school, there's no way I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to be a diplomat. And then I worked for a year in a law firm, and I loved it. So yeah, you got to hear about it from someone who's doing it, really, don't you, to know what it's actually like.
Yeah, you do. And I think it's good to have community days in courts so that students can come along. There have been instances where I've had students come behind the scenes to have a look at what we do and be able to be in the courtroom to have an idea of what's happening and discuss the cases with them so that they've got a picture of what actually happens rather than what happens on TV.
Every time my daughters argue with me, which is very often, I always suggest to them they may want to think about being a lawyer, but they're like, oh, it looks so boring. Your job is so boring, Mum. I would never want to be. And I'm like, it's more interesting than it appears. But I think a court day like that is a community day where they can actually come in. That is really exciting and interesting for them.
Yeah, it's good for us too, judges as well as court staff and lawyers, because it's always nice sharing your experience and expertise with other people, and some of the questions they ask are really good. Sometimes confronting, but
yeah, and I think for kids knowing that being a judge is a possibility, because I would have thought you'd have to have like an A++ degree, top of the class kind of academic career, and that it's actually achievable for people. Okay, so we go back to the question. Okay. You made time in your career to further other projects that you think important. Can you please tell us about the Auckland Family Violence Criminal Court?
Yeah, so in my first year as a judge, because of my experience and background in dealing with family violence, I was asked to set up and run the Auckland Family Violence Court. And at the time, I was very excited and very proud that happened, made me puff up my chest. Then I found out later that no one else wanted to do it. So that made me even more determined. And there was quite a bit of resistance from the legal community, particularly from criminal barristers, because their focus is acting for defendants, those that are alleged to have committed violence, and they're always complaining that victims make up these allegations. And there was also a bit of resistance from other judges because, they were saying, yeah, there isn't enough work for us to run a family violence court. But very quickly, we were running 3 days of nothing but family violence cases in the criminal court.
Wow.
And you could see there was a real demand for that. And when you look at the statistics, it makes sense, particularly when they're so bad in New Zealand. Someone dies every 10 days from family violence. A call is made to the police about family violence every 5 minutes. So there's a lot of that work. And I spent 5 years developing that. And then I focused and specialised in the family court after that.
And does it continue to run?
Yes, it has. And a lot of it depends really on the judge that is leading the court too, because they need to pull together everyone and the resources, and they also need to be rostered in that court regularly to make sure that they can run it. All the evidence from overseas suggests that it's very important to have one with possibly a backup judge running that court, and to have various agencies involved in it, community agencies. And nowadays you have lawyers who specialise in family violence work as well. And so the approach is quite different. It's very satisfying seeing people's lives changed in that way, because very often victims are saying, all I want is the violence to stop. I don't necessarily want the relationship to stop, but I do if the violence doesn't.
So that's like a wraparound, it provides wraparound support as well as a judge who knows about those sort of issues. Is that what the model is?
Right. And I think it helps being a family violence court judge as well, because you know every day the work that we do, what the dynamics are and what excuses people come up to say that they weren't violent or they don't need to do a program, those sorts of things. But we're giving them opportunities to change their lives, and it does happen. And it's very satisfying seeing that.
I bet.
And we notice also that we very often see the same people in the two courts, in the criminal court as well as the family court, because of what's going on.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So in that sort of vein, you work on pretty traumatic situations and on cases that can stretch for years, dealing with really heartbreaking situations in your work. Do you take that home with you? How do you carry that load outside of work?
I have a sort of personality that can leave things behind, and being male, I have little boxes where I put things, and I put my work in my work box, and that stays at work. So if I want to work, I return to work to do it. I don't bring it home. I find that's too difficult otherwise, and you tend to muck up the environments, and it can mess with your head. So I've just developed over the years, particularly doing family work, which can be very challenging emotionally for everyone, actually, participants as well as judges and lawyers. So that's how I deal with it. But I know some people really struggle to do that. I personally think it helped that I started doing criminal work before I did family, so that I had a bit of life experience. And that's how I deal with it anyway.
Thicken your skin a bit.
Yes, it does. And in fact, I stopped doing criminal work when I started to have children, because I found some of the violence was so distressing with the thought that my own children might be affected by that. I gravitated towards family work. And I love doing family work.
Okay, do you sometimes feel frustrated by the confines of the usual family court process and wish that you had license to do something a bit different to resolve a dispute or knock over a few tables? And if you do, what would you like to try, and what scope would judges already have to do that?
Well, I think within the framework that we've got, there are things that we can do. Most of my frustrations are with process. You know, it's quite a big transition when you go from private practice for 25 years and you're working for a government agency. You can't just pop off for a coffee with your friend. You can't decide that you're going to take tomorrow off. You work within the bounds of what you're given. And so one of the things that I like to do is to take a file and manage that out of usual court time. So I have a lot of conferencing at 9 o'clock in the morning or during the breaks to manage files, so that we keep on top of that. And I find that lawyers tend to work better with the judge doing that as well, for the benefit of the parties. So that's one way that I deal with things that are a bit differently. But in terms,
it sounds like a full day. So you're hearing cases, and then in the breaks you're doing conferencing.
Yes.
And eating lunch.
Yes, it is. But I kind of think you're at work, let's just get on with it.
Yeah.
Tend to start at 8 o'clock, and I usually leave about 6. So it is a long day, but it's exhilarating. There aren't many dull moments, I can tell you that.
No, you'd have to keep your mind pretty sharp, because you're going from one case to another.
Yes, and
within a few hours.
The key to that, though, is preparation.
Right.
So I read every file thoroughly before I deal with it, and I'll have notes on the file to remind myself about key aspects of it.
Yeah.
You're a pretty tech savvy judge, aren't you, too? You're more than some might be. Yeah. Do you see any areas where automation could help the family court generally make things a bit?
Yeah, I think we could do a lot more remotely myself. I think we can do a lot more electronically. Simple example is dissolutions of marriage. It's very paper-based, but we could easily do that electronically because all those files are actually handled in Wellington and then they're sent back and forth to the home court. But the team that looks after those dissolution applications are actually based in Wellington. So files are being transported all the time. And I think that's just so inefficient. So there's work being done at the moment to improve IT, and one of the areas that they're concentrating on is in the family court area. So that's very exciting.
I bet you'll be making your submissions.
Yes, well, they're working on that at the moment and interviewing providers, and so I don't think it'll be too far along before we start seeing that happening.
So next question. The government has recently announced that it will be working on new measures to give judges greater powers to identify and stop litigation abuse, which is where people try to use the court process to abuse or control or harass an ex-partner. Is this something that you see happening in the court? Is this a live issue in the court?
Very much a live issue. The difficulty is that you need to have a balance. You need a balance between people having the right to be heard and decisions made, and that's weighed against the fact that you also need to stop people abusing the process. And so that can be really hard sometimes. It requires, well, I think it requires a lot of front loading, if you like, triaging right from the beginning. And I think judges should be allowed to be involved much more right at the beginning and dealing with files then and considering whether applications should be rejected. What's happened over the years is that there's been a change in approach of how the staff deal with applications. A number of years ago, we would have very experienced staff and they'd be vetting these applications and rejecting them if they didn't meet the standards. But now that doesn't happen. The focus has shifted, and I think it needs to return back to that. It might be with the introduction of family court associates that might happen. I'd be interested in working with them and court staff to achieve that.
Can you tell us more about family court associates?
So the government has provided funding for the appointment of family court associates, and the legislation is being drafted at the moment for the role of family court associates, but we're not quite sure what the government is going to agree on and what calibre of person that will be. Ideally, from a judicial perspective, it would be really good to have experienced lawyers who are doing that. I think in other quarters they are suggesting that experienced case officers in the ministry could deal with that. But I think we need someone who has powers to actually do things would make a difference. So that's still in the early stages.
Yeah.
Hopefully by the end of the year we'll know better about
more about. And so do you have any thoughts about how what tools might help, or how we should try and meet that sort of challenging behaviour from litigants? Obviously, family court associates is one hopeful.
Yeah, it's hard. I think the key to it is the judge, really, because it's the judge who controls the court. And that's where I think it becomes important in having, as we did in Auckland, have dockets, what we call dockets. So in the Auckland dockets, there were 2 judges in each docket who have a number of files that they control. So it's either one of those 2 judges. And the idea of that is to have one set of judicial hands rather than having a different judge each time. And we were finding that you could have 6 or 7 judges dealing with one file, and it can easily get out of control, particularly when you're dealing with difficult litigants or one party is very keen on dragging things out. And We do that particularly in the area of relationship property, because that's often neglected. We try and do it for family violence cases, but frankly, there are so many that it's very difficult to manage in that way.
A related issue is wars of attrition, and you have touched on that, which is another form of abuse, a sort of well, I guess it's an economic abuse, where the economically more powerful person is able to draw out proceedings and win the war by wearing the other down or running out their energy or emotions. Do you think that lawyers carry some of the blame for that and might be a way of solving it to go after the lawyers?
Well, we like to find a scapegoat sometimes. The reality is that lawyers are like anyone else. You know, we've got really good lawyers. We've got some not so good lawyers. And the purpose of having a lawyer is to have them act for you and to provide legal advice. And sometimes that advice is needing to drag cases out. And that's where the judge becomes important, so that the judge can see what's happening and take steps to remedy that or deal with it. And that's why I think it's important that you have judges allocated to files, which is what happens in Australia. The lawyers are also required to promote reconciliation under the Act, or conciliation at the very least. And so they have a duty to work with people. But, you know, we find from a judicial perspective, we find that there is a whole range of different experience and expertise of lawyers. So even very experienced lawyers can do things to slow the system down, and they'll do it for a particular reason that is related to the client. So it's not just the lawyer who might be doing that. It'll be because they're led by the client to do that. Of
course. What sort of pressure can you bring to bear on the lawyer, or how can we shift the onus on the lawyer to also start cleaning up some of these applications?
I think as a judge, one of the things that you can do is to set standards for lawyers and how the court operates, and for judges to make that clear to the lawyers. Sometimes we're dealing with lawyers who have difficult personalities. So, you know, lawyers like the community, some are on the spectrum, and you have to take that into account in dealing with them as well. So, again, I think it's important for the judge to control that kind of environment and allow scope for being heard, but also making it clear about what the parameters are and what your expectations are.
Do you have the power to do things like award costs, not just against the party who you might decide has vexatiously litigated a point that didn't need to be raised, but maybe against the lawyer personally?
You can do that, but in very limited circumstances. But what I find is effective is if you make an order for costs against the client, they very quickly get their lawyer into line because they don't want to pay costs. My own view is that we should, and when I say we, in terms of the legal process, we should be spending more time educating lawyers about what you can put in affidavits, because I find those first affidavits are often full of things that aren't relevant, and all they tend to do is to escalate matters. And in Auckland, we have a lot of applications that are made to strike out parts of affidavits. That's an expensive process, and it can be time-consuming as well. And that's why I think we need to spend more time with education with lawyers, saying what is acceptable, what isn't, and
what are you looking to see in an affidavit or not see?
Yes, that's right.
Is that something the family court associates can help with, or is that totally unrelated?
Yeah, I think it's to do with education in conjunction with the Law Society.
Yeah,
I think You know, in the old days, I'm speaking like an old man now. But in the old days, when you were admitted as a lawyer and joined a law firm, your law firm would take you over to meet the judges. Now, I know that's impractical, but I think something like that should be done, where judges spend time talking to new lawyers and stressing the importance of contents of affidavits and what's acceptable and what isn't. And that's why I think it's helpful for lawyers to have a criminal experience first, because they very soon learn about what the rules of evidence are. And that's an area that is a bit of a hobby horse of mine.
While you're on the hobby horse, what would be your 3 top things that you'd like to get across in terms of educating people about affidavits? I guess you're starting with don't make legal arguments in affidavits.
Yes, I think the first step is to look at what it is that you're applying for and what you need to support that. And often people forget what it is that they're applying for, and then that's how they include a whole lot of information that's irrelevant. I think it's helpful to have a framework for an affidavit. For example, when preparing a without notice application for a protection order, it's really important to work on what the key elements are that a judge needs to have in mind when they grant the application. And it's very simple. We want to know whether they're in a domestic relationship, that's a qualifying relationship, and we want to know whether there's been violence and what their concern about that is, you know, that they're scared there's going to be further violence or whatever it might be. It's actually very simple, but you'd be surprised how often we receive affidavits that don't have the key elements in it.
It's telling the lawyer to go back and read the law. and
Yeah, it is.
And then make sure they satisfy the LUMs.
Well, and, you know, Tana said before about my IT abilities. I actually have hundreds of templates that I use day to day for work that I do. And what they are designed to do is to remind me what the key elements are of what I'm dealing with. And that helps me focus on that. And it also helps me focus the lawyers then on that, because they might make submissions that are entirely irrelevant to the application itself. So I'm constantly bringing them back and saying, well, let's focus on this.
Yeah. Okay. As a lawyer, you were you were a member of a profession with a bit of a mythology of heroes succeeding against the odds. We don't like to bash our profession, do we? But sometimes we feel a bit like heroes. Do judges feel a bit the same? And when judges go out on a limb with their decision making, you've got the additional fear, I guess, of your decision being overturned on appeal. Does that worry you? Or do you still see your role as to be creative in order to achieve a just result?
I think, well, there were a few questions in there.
Yeah.
My hero was
some input from Dad in that one.
Okay. My hero was Lord Denning.
Yeah.
So when I was a student, you know, you learned that he decided what he was going to do, and then he worked back from there. So,
the justice judge.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Yeah.
And in terms of the rest of your question, I don't know. I guess I worried when I was first made a judge about what was going to happen higher up. But the reality is that you have so many of your decisions appealed that you can't spend your time worrying about that. And you just hope that the higher courts get it right. Sometimes you agree with them and sometimes you don't. Mostly you do agree with them. Occasionally you'll think, yeah, they made a good point there. I sucked up in that regard. But it's very satisfying. I've had a few decisions go to the Supreme Court that have upheld or restored my decision, and that's very satisfying as well, particularly if the courts in between mess with my decision.
Yeah, which sometimes does happen.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
on record for saying, why does the High Court have to be so mean? Because they always seem like the mean ones. I know that's a simplistic view of things. They
Well,
always seem like the bad guy at the end of the day, don't they?
yeah, they can be. It depends on which side you're on, I think.
Hmm.
So we're never intending to have a High Court judge on this podcast.
No. We'll make sure they don't listen to the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll go straight to the Supreme Court.
That one's, yeah. Okay. So you were a counsel for child when you were a lawyer, and that's a special kind of lawyer, isn't it? Not just everybody gets to be a counsel for child, or should be. In some decisions, they've had a reasonably rough time, and you start to wonder whether you would want to be a counsel for child. Do you think we could and should be making that job better? And if so, what should we be doing?
Not sure how you could make it better. I think we have a really good system which is not shared around the world, and we're the envy of the world, really, in having counsel for child. But increasingly, I notice that it's not necessarily a safe role to play. You know, we recently had a lawyer who was assaulted very badly, and so badly, in fact, that he's put a hold on his legal career. And I know that other lawyers have had really terrible experiences for whatever reason. That comes with the territory in a sense, but they tend to be the extremes. In most cases, you are dealing with people who really care about their families and want a good outcome. It's interesting, when I first started law, I focused only on the law. And then I went through a period of my legal career where I was concentrating more on people. And then I came back to the law. And I think what happens in the counsel for child role is that it's really important not only to know the law and the bounds of that, but you're dealing with people. So you need to be good at relationships and making people feel that they've been heard, making them feel that they're understood. And so that's a crucial role in being able to negotiate settlements or agreements that parents reach and keeping them focused on their child.
Great.
Okay, I think you may have covered this anyway, but what one thing you would change about the family court if you were given the chance to do that?
I would pay the court staff a lot more money. They are the lowest paid government department in the country, Ministry of Justice. And I noticed recently that there was a new government department that was introduced, and the Ministry of Justice still came last in remuneration. So we have very dedicated staff who really believe in the work that they do, but it means that we're not attracting some of the managers that we need in terms of the experience, expertise and quality. And I think we could do a lot better in that regard. And that's one of the reasons why we have such a high turnover of staff. That's not good for the system. So that would be one thing that I would change, improving the working conditions for staff.
Okay, we'll get working on that.
Yeah, why do you think it is? Why are they
Well, it's always been low on the priority list.
Right.
We even get a lot of staff going to other government departments because they get paid more. For example, a lot go to ACC. They have a lower caseload and they get paid way more.
Yeah, and that's such a crucial part of, like you were saying, the triaging process, managing files, keeping lawyers in line.
Yeah,
I've had emails
keeping
me in line.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like it's an easy job that you would be trying to meet a lot of needs, I guess.
Yeah,
and people are putting pressure on you a lot.
Yes, well, that's a good point, because I noticed with emails, for example, once emails were used, the court staff are just bombarded with emails. you wouldn't believe the number of emails that come in from all directions, and they get copied into things they don't need to. And they receive voice messages on their phones that are not good on a Monday morning, during the weekend, late at night,
So
usually
how,
alcohol or drugs.
other than lobbying for higher pay, how can lawyers show the love for court staff? What should we be doing?
Having your papers in order.
Writing a good affidavit.
For example, filing documents in time makes the job a lot easier for court staff, because they're always scrambling at the last moment to collect everything that's filed late. So that's an area that would certainly make it a lot easier.
Okay, what can lawyers do to get the best out of their judge on the day?
Be respectful.
Yeah.
Be focused. Be organised and prepared. Know what you're wanting and understand what the legal elements are to achieve that. And if you're coming to court because you want a hearing, then you need to be talking to the judge about how that can be achieved. Timetabling orders for filing affidavits, that sort of thing. We get a lot of unrepresented parties nowadays, and I think it would be really good for unrepresented parties to get legal advice from time to time, especially at the beginning. We welcome people who are not represented, and we do our best to accommodate them, but we have to be careful that we are not seen to be favouring them against someone who has a lawyer. So what I tend to do when court starts is I actually address both the parties directly, even if they've got lawyers, so they understand what's going to happen and what the expectations are. And the same applies for unrepresented people. If it's a 15-minute conference, you don't have much time to have your say. So if you've prepared something in advance, which you filed, then all well and good.
Yeah, it sounds like preparation is the key, the Girl Guide motto, be prepared.
Yes, it is.
Okay, some people rely on, not us, but some people rely on film and television experience to work out what it would be like to attend the family court as a party. Can you give a potted version of what to expect for someone who might have to attend the family court?
Okay. There are some videos actually on the Ministry of Justice website with mock courts, but what you can expect is, I guess it depends a little bit on whether you've got a lawyer, but what you can expect is that you'll be seated at a table if you don't have a lawyer, and you will be invited when it's appropriate to say what you want. You should stand when you're speaking to the judge, and the reason why you do that is it means that you've got the floor and no one can interrupt you while you're having your say.
And what do they call you when they address you in the court?
They should call you sir or ma'am. And most judges will begin whatever court event it is by explaining what's happening and making sure that everybody gets a turn to speak. So it's important when other people are speaking that you don't interrupt them, because that can look as if you are being disrespectful. If you're not sure about the process, just ask the judge. And if the judge has forgotten to say something about when it is that you're going to talk, you're very welcome to ask the judge politely when you'll get a chance to speak, or whether you'll be getting a chance. Sometimes that's a polite way of reminding the judge to not forget you.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, our last section is our quick fire question time, where we have 10 questions with 10 seconds each to answer them. Take some of the pressure off the considered answer. So here we go. You're allowed to take longer than 10 seconds. Sometimes we take longer than 10 seconds with the question. What on-screen lawyer would you be given the chance?
On-screen lawyer. I don't watch lawyer programs. Oh, there was that Australian lawyer who was the criminal lawyer. I can't remember the name of the series. Really irreverent, naughty criminal lawyer.
Yeah, I think I remember that one. Yeah.
Not the one in the castle, obviously.
No,
No,
I
not in
think,
Counsel.
did he have a drinking problem?
Yeah, he had a drinking problem. I love that one because it was so
Yeah.
Rake,
innocent.
Rake.
Yes,
Apparently he's called
Right,
Rake.
yes,
that's
yes.
Thank you, Don.
That's my favourite.
Okay, what famous case would you travel back in time to rehear?
Famous case.
Like a
Mm.
famous case. Maybe one of Lord Denning's.
No, I would. It would probably be the abortion case in the States and Supreme Court.
Oh, Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's the subject of a whole nother podcast.
Yes.
What court case are you glad you didn't have to decide? And it could be the same answer, I guess.
To decide. Probably the Arthur Allen Thomas case.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the next question, do judges ever get imposter syndrome? Bearing in mind that we're women and lawyers and pretty much have it.
You can speak hypothetically. No, not present company, not accepted. Have you heard that judges ever get imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I hear it from time to time from, interestingly, from female judges. I never hear it from male judges. And that probably says something about
It really does.
how men tend to be full of ourselves. And
Yeah. And if you can do it, if you can do 50% of it, you can do it. Whereas a woman usually feels like they have to know 100%.
What is your favorite part of your job?
Favorite part of my job is dealing with adoptions and change of gender on birth certificates.
What's the worst part of your job?
The worst part is the inefficiencies in systems. I'm a very systems orientated person and I like things to be orderly, and that's quite a challenge in this role when you don't have control of your working environment.
What are you looking forward to about living in Tauranga?
Being closer to my grandchildren, and I should probably say my own children as well. Although not all of them are in the Tauranga area, but being close to family is very important.
And hopefully the traffic's better. So we often tell our clients to imagine they have a family court judge sitting on their shoulder in their interactions with their partner. What advice would you give parties if you were sitting on their shoulder?
To listen, to remember that there's another point of view. One of the things that I learned from my mother, she used to drill in us as kids, is to always put yourself in the other person's shoes. And I find that to be a good thing. And I think about that very often in the work that I do, understanding why it is that people behave in a particular way in the court, for example, or at home, or with their partner.
It's the root of empathy, isn't it? What is one myth about the courts that you would like to dispel?
That we have a hammer and we bang it.
That's a really important one.
Oh, that drives me nuts.
So no gavels.
No gavel, because it's only in America, and it upsets me when I see on stuff in New Zealand when they have a justice article and they have a gavel. And I've written to them both about it, but they don't care.
Oh,
That's surprising. Do judges ever get a thank you or a sorry?
Thank you. We usually get a thank you after an adoption case. Maybe that's why I like doing them. But it's not very often we get a thank you. We're more likely to get criticism than a thank you.
Mm.
Well, it's interesting because when you're a lawyer, you talk about the judge all the time, but when you're a judge, that chatter stops, you see. So judges amongst themselves will talk about lawyers and what happens with them and what they're doing and which ones irritate them. But otherwise, we don't get feedback at all from the community that we're actually serving.
Mm.
I think it was weird at my going away in Auckland. A lot of nice things were said, but I thought it was interesting they left it until I was going
Maybe we should start Google reviews for judges.
Well, there was a paper that did that, the business paper, what did they call it? I can't remember. But they approached a number of QCs as they were at that time, and they got anonymous information about the High Court judges, and it was very frank and very spot on, but not always appreciated.
Oh, I bet. What is one change you would immediately make to the family court area if you could?
Didn't we cover that already?
No, let's consider like a 10-second one.
I'm pretty sure we covered it.
We've had a previous answer, which was abolish it. So you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, I would. The thing I would do is focus on counselling at the beginning, rather
Bring
than
back 6 hours counselling.
Yeah, we need better counselling and more of it, because it's been sidelined in the process that we now do, and that was cost saving at the time. I've been a judge for 17 years, and there've been a lot of different political parties during that time, and so you see how things change during that time. So it depends on what's going on at the time.
Then they bring it back in, and then they take it out, and then they
that's
bring it in. Okay, you may have covered this with your mother's advice, but what is the best advice you've ever been given, maybe apart from putting yourself in someone else's shoes, which I think is excellent advice?
One of the really good pieces of advice as a judge is to let things go. And I thought that was really good advice, because sometimes you'll sit on what you've done and wonder to yourself whether you've done the right thing. And you can mull over that, because I think it's good to be reflective, but at some point you have to let it go. And usually that's on my bike ride home at the end of the day.
Okay, our last section is called the best question ever.
Yep.
And for you, Judge Lex de Jong, that question is, what do you want to be remembered for?
I think, wow, it's not easy talking about yourself.
Yeah.
I guess I'd like to be remembered for being kind, compassionate, and willing to let everybody be heard, but also being firm as well.
Awesome. I think you're well on the way to that one. So thank you so much, Judge de Jong, for your insights. It's been a really interesting session. This has been Divorce Cafe. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love to hear from you, and for you to subscribe so that you get every new episode as it comes out. If you have a burning question, you can email us at divorcecafe@hendersonreads.co.nz. And yeah, thank you so much, Judge de Jong, and best of luck in your new posting.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I enjoyed that. And will you be playing another one bites the dust as we leave?
We can edit it in later.
Yeah, we can definitely get that one in there. If you'd like to do a little karaoke version as we go through the end credits, Donnie's a muso from way back, so I'm sure he can put it in. Thank you so much, Judge de Jong, and to everyone else. Hope to see you next time.